VR. All sorts of stuff happening right now in my world of freelance life and that kind of thing. Real quick before I go more into that, just a couple work things. I went to a V-Ray conference the other day, which was really cool. They were unveiling V-Ray 3.0, which has like plugins for Revit, and that'll be really great. And I was surprised that they didn't talk much about virtual reality, even though that all the panelists, including one of my friends, Dennis Harvey, from school, who's working for BIG, which is Bjark Ingels Group, they did the second World Trade Center and got to reveal that at the V-Ray conference in this beautiful V-Ray render, which was really fantastic. None of the panelists really talked about virtual reality at all, despite talking about how hungry they are for ways to immerse clients and immerse themselves in their virtual environments, which, you know, that's exactly what things like the Oculus Rift and the Samsung Gear VR are for. Also at work, we had on Monday a big conference with a bunch of people who were working on the Wisconsin School of Music with, and I worked on optimizing our Wisconsin model again so we could put it on a laptop, and we had the most productive virtual reality based conference ever. We went in the conference room, I had the laptop set up, which, by the way, the laptop is broken, the screen broke, and it's going to be repaired, so it's going to be really hard to edit this, since I usually edit this on the train between like Monday and Tuesday, and that's going to be gone all of at least next week, so hopefully this video isn't out too late. Anyway, had the laptop in the conference room with the Wisconsin School of Music, had the Oculus Rift hooked up to the laptop, optimized, working smoothly, and then in addition to that, I had a couple phones out which were able to use the Google Cardboard and show some different aspects of the Wisconsin School of Music design, and all those were able to use Chromecast so that everyone could see what whoever was looking at something could see on the big screen, and it made for an incredibly dynamic discussion and very productive, and we were in there for like 45 minutes, and I feel like it was just bam, 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 all these decisions got made about how to move forward with the project, and that was all because of the immersive, you know, sense of presence that was afforded by the virtual reality experience. Being able to be in there and be like, okay, we're going to change that material, we need to change the shape of that, I can't believe how steep that is, that needs to change, this feels really tight, we need to open that up a little bit. And it's this kind of discussion that you simply cannot have with renders, or even when you're rotating around a 3D model. This is a totally different experience. It's a new paradigm. I'm so excited to be kind of, I can say it, I'm kind of on the frontier of using virtual reality in architecture, and I really look forward to seeing where it goes now, and other ways that it can influence the design process and the way that people perceive, you know, spaces before they're actually built. So that's really cool. But then after that meeting, the rest of my week, we want to send the app to a bunch of people over in their Chicago office, the architecture firm we're doing this project with, and they all use iPhones. So as I think I mentioned, you know, maybe a month or two ago, I had finally found a way to take an Apple iPhone, plug it into an old MacBook Pro from someone else in my office, and load apps onto their iPhone, but only after we've entered in their UDID, unique identifier, and, you know, put them into our system as an Apple developer, and it's incredibly complicated, whereas Android, it's just, here's an APK file, allow installation from unknown sources, done. So that was all working fine and able to work when we plugged in phones. But then all these people want to access this Wisconsin app, and they can't come to the office, so I can't plug in their phone directly to the computer. Then I found out about Test Flight, which I guess now is called iTunes Connect, and it is a way for, you know, an Apple developer, like, you know, the account we have now, to be able to remotely provide apps to like beta testers and that kind of thing. You're only allowed, I think, 75 of them, but so, you know, maybe sometime in the future we might have to like remove people from the program, but for now it seems like, oh, this is great. Anyone who wants to look at one of our apps, we just invite them to be a beta tester on our account, and then hooray, they get to play with it. The problem with that is that despite sounding relatively straightforward, the process of getting this to people is so incredibly convoluted. I went through the iTunes Connect process. Oh my god, giant hawk! I went through the iTunes Connect process of setting up the app and all the permissions and the certificates and the provisioning profiles, all these things that need to be done, and then it's like, okay, well, here's an app that worked on someone's phone and that was perfect, so now I'm just going to archive it and then upload it as an app. Sounds easy. Except whenever I tried to archive it, I'd get some kind of weird error. I'd look up the error, I'd find some weird workaround to solve it, delete this line of code, whatever, try to upload it again. Now it's like, oh, well, that's not the 64-bit version of the app. And it's like, what? Why does it need to be 64 bits? And then I find out, oh, for some reason now all Apple apps need to be 64 bits. So I go back to Unity. Unity 5.1 just came out. There's a nice little feature in there that says, oh, if you want your Apple product to be 64-bit, just change the architecture to ARM v7 and ARM 64 and universal and, you know, this ILM blah, blah, blah style of code instead of mono develop. And it's like, okay, that's really simple. example. So I do that, and it creates a 64-bit app. And as of Friday, whenever I was uploading a successful archive, which, by the way, like the process of going from Unity just to the point where you're uploading the archive is way too complicated and long and requires like 10 steps, and each step has, you know, like loading for 5 minutes. Oh, do you want to use the Fisher DAX profile? Yes. Blah, blah, blah. More loading. Another dialog box. And it takes forever, so it was really hard to be like working on other things while that was going on. But then as of the end of the day on Friday, I still hadn't been able to upload something without it telling me that it wasn't a 64-bit version, which is crazy because I've checked everything and I know for a fact that I am uploading a 64-bit version of these apps. Anyway, that's a little bit of the VR stuff happening at work. Totally different story on Monday of, not this past Monday, but the Monday before that. So like, you know, when I was working on releasing the previous episode, or this episode 18, I got contacted by Bravo Media, which I'd mentioned in the past, you know, had some interest in me potentially doing some freelance stuff for them. Very briefly, I was looking at doing something for Sax with them through Unity, and instead they ended up going with HTML, and that was all fine. But then they kept saying like, oh, maybe we'll have you do this, you know, little vanity project for us, or this other project. And then they weren't contacting me, so I was thinking like, maybe nothing's going to work out here, and so I just kind of left it alone. And then on that Monday, I got an email from one of the higher-ups there at Bravo Media who basically said, hey, we got this like theater projection-y thing we want to do. We think you'd be a great fit for it. Do you want to come in and talk to us about it? So I went in during my lunch break and chatted about it, and it's a really awesome project because it's just barely outside of the scope of what we do at Fisher DAX Associates, so it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have any kind of non-compete clause problems, but it's still very much in my wheelhouse and my skill set while also kind of stretching it a little bit. What is it? They are being contracted by Late Night with Stephen Colbert to figure out a projection mapping system for the Ed Sullivan Theater. The Ed Sullivan Theater, under the reign of David Letterman, it's a beautiful space. It's got this dome and the spire and beautiful kind of old, you know, 1900s architecture, but the area was very closed off under David Letterman, I think primarily for acoustic purposes. You know, when you have big domes, you might get like echoes and that kind of thing, so it was all closed off. Stephen Colbert is like, screw that, let's tear all that down, let's make the space beautiful and active and interesting, and so they designed kind of a new grid that they want to put up there. So my first task was like model the new grid, put it in this old Revit model they have of the Ed Sullivan Theater, and then we want to figure out where we can put projectors in the model that will, you know, cover the dome, cover these walls in the back, cover the windows, and how do we do that? So I went about designing an app, again, first just creating the space, and then basically using like a first-person controller, the way you'd like control a character and move around. I basically thought of the projector, each projector as a character, and had it so you could just swap between the different projectors and move them around and change the lens types. I figured out a way to calculate throw distance and convert that to field of view and put some colors and some numbers to distinguish the different projectors, and just kind of move throughout the space and be like, well, we can put it here on the grid and we can hit this, and then, you know, just kind of go through each one individually and play with, you know, making that work. And at first, the first version of the app I made was, the idea was that anyone could kind of go into it and move the projectors around and do whatever they want. And then when it became a little bit more clear that, you know, I needed to actually solve where the projectors should go, then it became more about a presentation app and a way of just showing, you know, here's where we want them to go and here's some different ways to look at it. And what was great about that was I was actually able to use my original file, which was more, you know, the drive around the projectors. I was able to use that to design the location, so that app basically became something for myself to place the projectors, and then the next version of the app that I was giving to everyone else was to show where I had put them. And that was a really cool thing I was able to play with, was able to get a beautiful model using the Unity web player. You know, I did stuff with like field of distance and ambient occlusion and some nice materials, and it looked really, really pretty. So once all that was looking good, they were like, wow, you know, this is moving along a lot faster than we thought. Look, we're going up to the Ed Sullivan Theater on Monday, so, you know, a week from when I had first heard about this project. And they said, do you think instead of having like a web player version of this, and we were just going to bring screenshots, do you think you can make a VR version of it so we can actually like look around? And I thought, oh, okay, sure, I can do that. I'm thinking like, I got my house party this weekend, but I bet I can make something work. So the first thing I did was just very quickly, you know, as fast as I could, just bring down the vertice count in the model, try to optimize it. I did it with my Google Cardboard thing, and you know, it was kind of working. It wasn't super elegant, but I was like, it works. So then I said, okay, well, maybe this is a good opportunity for me to use a Samsung Gear VR, something that my office hasn't purchased, but they have like 2 of them. And they said, yeah, give that a try. So I brought this home over the weekend. You'll hear in the house section, you can hear all about my party. And then Sunday, I was like, okay, I'm going to make this work. And long story short, Here's what the Samsung Gear VR looks like, very Tron, by the way. But long story short, on Sunday, I spent like 13 hours working on this, putting this together. Yeah, or more than that, actually. I started basically at noon and then kind of worked, you know, consistently till about 4:30 in the morning. So, you know, a little break in there for Game of Thrones, I guess. But basically, yeah, you have your Samsung phone, only the Galaxy Note 4, and this is made by Oculus, so when you're making your Unity file, basically, it has exactly the same setup as your Oculus file, same prefabs, same cameras, versus when I do my stuff with Google Cardboard, where I'm using the Duravis Dive SDK, which is totally different, so I have to swap out the Oculus stuff and put that in. But in this case, I'm literally just changing from a PC build to a Android build, and then doing some stuff with, like, you know, special keys to make it so that it can operate on this phone, because for some reason Samsung or Oculus wants to know every single app and what phone they're being put on and that kind of thing. So anyway, whenever you snap this in, basically you put this on and it pops up, and it's, you know, very, very smooth transitions into whatever world you have in here. But my first impression, once I had put my, like, optimized, you know, model into this, was, you know, this isn't actually that much better than Google Cardboard, which I found kind of surprising. And there's some weird things that it does that Google Cardboard doesn't, that is, again, part of the Oculus SDK, where it has something called time warp, where if you're moving your head too fast, it's trying to compensate for the frames that are lost, and so it tries to build those. And so the way that looks on here, so with Google Cardboard, basically, you just kind of lose those frames, and it actually doesn't, you know, hurt your view that much. What it does here is you get these weird black bars on the side where it's like trying to catch up with your eyes, and so it's this strange thing where your field of view gets really narrow, and I don't think it actually helps that much, so I was running into that. But as of, you know, 4:30 in the morning, I'd optimized the model as much as I could. I was doing all these different builds to try to get this to work. I was baking light maps, because that's a way to bring down the draw call count and helps with occlusion culling and all that kind of thing. And by 4:30 in the morning, I had baked all these things in Unity 5, and they just weren't working. And what I found out over this past week is that Unity 5 still is not very well optimized for mobile. It's fantastic for something like a web player build, which is what I was doing the week before. But when you need to, you know, make it a really optimized model, Unity 5 wants to be pretty. It wants to have lights and shadows and, you know, nice ambient occlusion, and that's still really hard to do on a mobile platform, and they haven't done much to make it easier. So I learned that, you know, I really need to go back and I need to change all my shaders from the new Unity 5 standard shader to the old legacy shaders. I need to probably still do some stuff with my light maps and bake those in a different way. But I did learn all sorts of tricks. You know, whenever I'm in a tight deadline, something like that, like I've talked in the past about how I love doing, you know, like the global game jam and that kind of thing, because on a deadline that tight, I'm kind of forced to learn a lot of things very quickly. And even though, you know, by Monday morning, I kind of came in and was like, it works, and then, you know, I don't think anyone was super impressed by what I had at that point, and it was totally okay, because we pushed back the meeting at the Ed Sullivan Theater, and I've continued to work on the web player version this week, while kind of telling myself I'm going to keep optimizing this. But yeah, I did learn a lot of new things about how best to use Unity 5, which has some pretty interesting differences from Unity 4. One thing is some of the scripting. I found some ways to optimize it a little bit more. The shaders, the light maps. I was using reflection probes and light probes, which is another way to optimize the lighting for anything that isn't static. Static things can be very well optimized, because things like lights and shadows can be baked right into it, and then it looks like it's real time, but then, you know, it's just staying there. Anything that's going to move in a scene, you want that to be a little bit more dynamic. So, you know, again, light probes and reflection probes, which I hadn't used before, are a really good way to compensate for that and still keep things relatively optimized. I'm still not quite sure the best way to deal with the fact that the Ed Sullivan Theater is a very round, robust, detailed, ornate structure. You know, when I've optimized things like the Wisconsin School of Music, a lot of that's orthogonal. A lot of that is some very rectangular, straight blocks that, you know, I can optimize down to, like, this is just a stretched cube or whatever. Whereas here with the dome, like, there's certain things that are symmetrical, and I can kind of instance some of those things, but it's certainly not intuitive, and I don't want to build the entire model from the ground up again. So, you know, I think this week I'm going to be playing more with the best way to bring this into the Samsung Gear. And you know what, I might even try going back to the Google Cardboard version, because for all I know, that might actually be a more optimized way to do it. And the weird thing, of course, is I could do Google Cardboard on the Samsung Galaxy Note and just leave out the Gear VR, but it's such a cool thing, and it's really comfortable, and I really would love to make this work if I can. So we'll see where that goes, but it's been a really interesting couple of weeks for freelance stuff. I think there's just more of that on the horizon, so thank you for listening to that, and that's it it for VR. Oh, another VR thing I forgot to mention, because last week was crazy. On June 4th, I think that was last Thursday, I was contacted by this group called Protein, which is a UK market research trends group. At first I thought they were writing an article about like VR or 3D, and they wanted to, you know, ask me questions about that kind of stuff. Turns out they did want to ask me questions about VR and 3D and AR and, you know, 3D printing and all that kind of stuff. But I guess they're just a company that like Coca-Cola and Red Bull and, you know, Google hire to kind of see what the millennials of today are doing. So yeah, I'll just say they paid me $400 to sit down with them for a couple hours and answer some survey questions and just talk about 3D and VR, and yeah, it was cool. I mean, it was kind of fun talking about what my experience has been with all those things, and a lot of it was like, what was your first exposure to it, and how did that develop, and what do you think of it now, and what do you think the future of it is? So that was actually really kind of useful to, you know, frame those things for myself and ask some questions that that I was interested in knowing my own perspective on those things and hadn't really thought about them before. That sounds really conceited, but it was a cool interview and really useful, and we did that actually in the conference room, my office. In the future, I should really tell my office when things like that are happening, because I think everyone was really confused what was going on. When I came in on Monday, one of my coworkers said, "Oh, how'd the interview go?" And I said, "Oh, it went well." He said, "So did you get the job?" And I was like, "Oh, it wasn't really that kind of thing." He's like, "Well, what happens if you get the job?" And I was like, "No, it's not a job." It was like totally, it's like as though, you know, I was interviewing for another job that I would leave Fisher Dax for and go to it. No, wasn't that kind of thing. But that was kind of interesting. And then they contacted me again later to say, "Hey, Alex, do you know anyone that considers themselves kind of, you know, very high-tech and interested in 3D printing and augmented reality and that stuff?" And I was like, "Yes, why?" And they're like, "We need people to fill out some surveys, and we're going to pay them $150 each for each survey." And I was like, "That's fantastic." So I tried, you know, I've said before that my dream is to be able to have enough work that I can send out to like my friends who are talented and maybe kind of underemployed and that kind of thing. And this was a great little microcosm of that, of like, oh yeah, I can find 10 people that know things about this stuff and could use an extra $150. So it was kind of cool to be able to send out that survey to a bunch of people. So that's another VR thing. Crazy. I don't even know how they found me. I don't know if it was from my VR lecture on the Microsoft building, which I posted online, and they contacted me like a couple days later. I should have asked them, but yeah, UK Market Research Group. That's a real thing. Protein.